Natalie, since you are hosting, would you like to start us off?
Oh, I forgot that I am the host now. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back to Unleash the Goats. We are talking about the prequels today. We'll get into it. I'm Natch, she, her.
I'm Angela / Faye sometimes, she, her.
I'm Sugar, also she, her.
I also want to put out there, if you are just coming into Star Wars, this is not the podcast for you. We are not spoiler free. We talk about all the things. I do want to establish that we are not going to spoil Ahsoka today. We are letting people actually watch the show as it comes out. Correct?
Correct.
Yes.
I say that as if I have the ability to spoil Ahsoka. I can tell you about the first episode.
I was going to say, yeah, as the one person here who hasn't seen everything that's come out yet.
Yes. Don't spoil it for me, because we'll have a whole episode to talk about it.
Yeah, you totally haven't been watching all of our reactions in the Discord channel at all.
Well, the great thing is that I don't know what they're in response to.
That's a fair point.
So it kind of goes over my head. Also, I have been very focused on watching the prequels.
This is
for the
true.
first time in probably 15 years.
We're so proud of you.
Thank you. I worked really hard.
I was going to ask how long it had been. Have you only seen them once before this?
No. So my brother was... What's funny is that as I was watching them, I could really tell where we had watched these movies and where we hadn't. Phantom Menace was like a little familiar to me. Attack of the Clones, very familiar. The first scene where they're chasing the bounty hunter, like, sequence, that was super familiar to me. Everything else was kind of like, okay, I kind of know this. And then as soon as we got into the scene on Geonosis, is that the name of
You're
the
right.
planet?
Yes.
I'm so smart. As soon as we got there and, like, the little, like, beast things came out to, like, kill them, I was like, oh, I know this scene by heart. So this is the scene that my brother must have, like, rewound and rewatched over and over and over again. And then Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith was completely unknown to me. I was like, I know these lines from Obi-Wan, but I don't, like, I was watching the scenes and I was like, this reminds me of the Lego Star Wars game that we would play. But I don't remember the movie itself.
All right, so that establishes Natch's level of familiarity with the prequels that we are going to be talking about. Thankfully, it is relatively fresh in your head.
Yes.
I did put in here Natch's thoughts about the prequel trilogy, since you have just recently rewatched them. So this was in lieu of giving your not-so-brief recap of the entire trilogy.
A lot happens.
A lot, it is. Yeah, we'll get to that. But I put down a couple of questions. I didn't know if you wanted to answer them. I just was going like, did you have a favorite film out of the three this time around? Any favorite scenes? Overall impressions? Was it better or worse than you remembered or expected it to be?
Ooh, interesting. I want to say that Phantom Menace was actually my favorite. I think because I love Qui-Gon. And that's all we get of him.
Mood. And
I spent a lot of the other two being frustrated with Anakin. And so I get that that's the point, but baby Anakin was the most enjoyable for me to watch.
You have such valid opinions, Nash.
Thank you. What were your other questions?
If you had a favorite scene, and, like, was it any better or worse than you were remembering or expected it to be?
It was definitely better than I remembered. I was surprised at how much happens. Because in my head, I'm like, you do this, and you do this, and you do this, and then I watched them, and, like, 7 things happened in between each of the plot points that I remembered. Yeah. Which is why my summaries are so long, is because I was like, but I don't remember this happening. Is it important? Not always.
Not always, but yeah, we'll get to that. The whole idea that there's a lot happening in the prequels that is actually plot relevant, but it kind of just flies by under the radar.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think favorite scene.
It's hard. There's a lot of good scenes.
Because I just watched Revenge of the Sith, the scene where Obi-Wan is going after General Grievous, like that whole sequence, fucking loved that.
On Utapau?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you totally remember the planet's name.
Okay, because they're there and they don't talk about why they're there, but they are like, hey, we're gonna get all of the Separatists over, like, to Mustafar, which is maybe how you say it.
Yeah, that is how you say it. But, yes, Utapa is where he's killing Grievous.
Yes.
Yeah, and then they're evacuating all the Separatists from another place to be like, hey, you're going to go to a super special meeting on Mustafar. Like, the Palpatine wants to congratulate you on winning the war.
Yeah.
So great. And then they all get murdered.
And then they get murdered.
That's actually one of my favorite scenes. I love when they all get murdered. Get fucked for being awful fascists. Okay. So mostly today what we're talking about in the prequels is not all the prequels all together, because that we would be here for the entire day and nobody has time for that. So what instead we're talking about today are the themes and messages that are trying to be portrayed throughout the prequels and how they're portrayed in each of the films. So the first one is going to be how a good man becomes a villain, basically Anakin's fall, and then selfishness versus selflessness and how that's shown through different characters and different choices. And then finally, choice, agency. Where in these arcs did these characters have a choice and where didn't they have a choice?
That's a lot that's happening.
We're tackling a lot, but we're gonna make it. It's gonna be great.
Okay.
All right. So in episode 1, there is a big theme with the corruption in politics, with the Trade Federation and the rigged election, which shows a lot of like how selfish the Trade Federation is, because they are just putting all of their like money needs, capitalism metaphor, anyone,
metaphor
ahead of the entire galaxy.
When you say rigged election, are you talking about Palpatine becoming the Supreme Chancellor?
Yes, because he is.
Okay.
You know, we don't get to see him do most of the work that goes into this, but like, I think it's at least implied that Palpatine has basically been making a lot of friends. Also, the whole point of the Phantom Menace and the events that are happening are that Palpatine is setting himself up to become Supreme Chancellor by having the Trade Federation attack his home planet, so that he can, like, blame the current Chancellor for not helping and use the sympathy vote to kind of get himself voted in and the other one voted out. He kind of has to work around the fact that Padme shows up, because he's very clearly trying to get her to die before she shows up, and then sort of just takes advantage of the fact that she's there and has her do the vote of no confidence thing instead of him. But like, he gets the same result, regardless of Padme showing up or not. So it's a rigged election in the sense that, like, he's using this attack on Naboo to get himself maneuvered in, and he's made enough friends, however he's doing it beforehand, to ensure that this is a result that's going to happen.
I mean, it's entirely possible that he has bribed and intimidated people into voting for him.
Right, yes, when I say friends.
Alliances
and
yeah.
whatever's. Yeah, that he's probably bribing and threatening. But he is also trying to come off still as, like, a generally friendly, good, like, sweet old man at this point, so he might not be doing super overt threats at this point. That seems a little against the kind of politics he's going for within Phantom Menace. But unless he's, like, getting other people to do it without implicating himself, which is possible. He does end up doing that later. But he's also able to blame it on the Separatists later, and he can't do that yet. So anyway, yeah, that's the whole thing with the rigged election. Yeah.
I actually have a very important question that I was thinking about the whole time.
Please ask.
When, like, coming into the prequels, because they obviously came after the originals, I know things about Star Wars. Are we meant to understand that Palpatine is the Emperor and, like, Lord Sidious?
I mean, it is the same actor who played it. So I feel like anybody who, like, understood that it was the same actor would be able to put those things together, even though I don't. Faye, you might be able to know this better than I do. I don't think he's ever called Palpatine in the original trilogy.
Yes, people did know that Palpatine was Palpatine. first of all, George Lucas told everybody in an interview. People were like, "Oh, what's the Phantom Menace?" And he was like, "Palpatine. He's the Emperor, obviously." So it wasn't like it was a secret.
Ah. Okay.
Yeah, this was back before the days where Disney was like, nobody gets to know anything ever. Spoiler culture has ruined everything.
What's funny is that watching it, knowing that Palpatine is the Emperor, because I don't have the context of the original trilogy, really, and I just, like, was watching it at face value, basically. But I was like, yeah, Palpatine is, like, obviously the Emperor, because that's a thing that I know, but also, like, you can very obviously see him put pieces into place.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a way more interesting story because you know the spoilers. It's almost like Disney should stop being so afraid of it.
I
Anyway.
believe the name Palpatine itself comes from the novelization. There was a novelization where he's mentioned in the prologue, and they named him Palpatine, which came from George Lucas's like giant timeline that he had. So he was always named Palpatine. He was not named Palpatine in the original movies, but that was the name that was like known by fans, obscure fans, well, probably the ones who actually read the book, for about maybe 10 years before the prequels came out.
Okay, so it wasn't a totally new name for people as well.
Excellent.
There were people, I think, who weren't aware. Probably a lot of the kids, likely, who were watching the prequels.
Yeah.
Might have been less aware of that particular reveal coming. But most of the adults were likely a little bit more familiar with.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We can move on.
There's also some stuff in episode 1, obviously. There's a big theme about the Jedi not being superhuman. That they can be killed, which kind of... obviously is going to lead us into Anakin's stuff about killing them all later.
You know that thing that he does.
The superhuman thing is actually really interesting because in the original trilogy, they talk a lot about Jedi as them being like myths and legends and like warriors of old. So like there is this mythos built up of them in the original trilogy. And the only Jedi we see is Vader, Yoda, and Obi-Wan. So Vader, obviously terrifying, basically unkillable till the very end when he chooses to die. Obi-Wan chooses to die. Yoda dies at like 900 something, and by choice essentially. So they have this like huge mythos built up in the original trilogy.
Be a natural death, but
yeah, but like he's like ready for it. He's not like unprepared or anything like that. It's not like doesn't catch him unawares.
Yeah, he's like, I'm 900, I'm ready.
Yeah, exactly. So when we get into the prequels, he starts off immediately, George Lucas does, with saying, hey, Jedi are regular people. Guess what? They might have superpowers, but they can still die just like everybody else.
Yeah, they can, specifically that they can be killed. Yeah, I mean, and that's like the myth and legend thing does still come into that movie because you've got Anakin talking about how Jedi are invincible and that these are the myths and legends he in particular has heard. So we know that like that kind of mythos that we got from the original trilogy does still exist, but they've kind of allowed it to be an in-universe mythos in the prequels in order to emphasize like, no, Jedi can absolutely be killed. They're not invincible.
We love them though. We still love them.
Well, yeah, the fact that they are not invincible is one of the best things about them, quite honestly.
When you learn that they are just, like, people and not, like, gods, it makes them much more, like, approachable as characters.
Right, not that you couldn't approach characters like Obi-Wan and Yoda, obviously, but they do fit more into, like, the wise sage kind of thing,
right.
Whereas you get a little bit of a different view of them in this film. You know, you've got Obi-Wan being this kind of, like... little brat, honestly, through most of the film. And
it's excellent, and we love it.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, he keeps that attitude throughout the entire film. It's not like he doesn't have moments of that in the original trilogy. It's just a little bit more concentrated in the prequel films than it was in A New Hope. But, yeah, we can move on to Anakin. And we can hit on this again more when we sort of analyze things a little bit more later. But, like, Anakin being this very young, compassionate... kind, sweet child as his sort of beginning was a controversial choice, apparently. Not something I would have picked up on as a child when I was watching this for the first time, obviously. But apparently people were a little bit taken aback by Darth Vader having started out life as a normal kid.
having started life being like, oh, can I pod race for you so that you can win money? With, like, no ulterior motive. Just, like, I can help you. So let me. Ugh, this is why I liked the first one so much, is because he's so cute and sweet and helpful.
Yeah.
And doesn't do any murder.
I mean, technically, he does sort of kill people in the pod race.
Does he actually? I don't think he ever intentionally
does. He does not directly cause any murder.
You could argue, though, that there's probably some Neimoidians on that droid control ship that he does help blow up.
Oh, he super does. Okay, I take it back. He does do some murder.
But that's not murder. They are, like, in the middle of a battle. He is an enemy combatant. That's not considered murder, but he does technically get involved in killing people within the battle. But it's not direct. It's not murder. He is still the good guy.
It's not murder the way that he murders people later. You're so right.
It's not quite the same, but I do believe that he is more intentionally... Like, I don't think he sees them, but I'm relatively certain there are Neimoidians on that particular ship, and it's not just droids. It's a huge ship. It's a pretty big ship, so there must be at least one or two kind of up in the control area, but anyway, he is supposed to be very compassionate and very kind and very sweet, and this obviously does work through the theme of how a good man goes bad, which is kind of the main point of the entire trilogy, is looking at how a good thing or a good person can become corrupted. And we've sort of been hitting on it in the other two things we talked about at this point, but the parallel being made in the films is that the other good thing being corrupted is the Republic, and very specifically the Senate. Not the Jedi, like a bunch of people seem to think. The Jedi are not being corrupted. They have not already been corrupted. They do not fall because of their corruption. That's not how this works.
Yeah, at no point in the prequels do we meet any corrupt Jedi aside from Anakin, who we see actively being corrupted by Palpatine. There are no others. Right. I mean, there's Dooku, but he has also been corrupted by Palpatine. He is no longer a Jedi when we meet him. He is a Sith. And he had left the Jedi Order long before he was corrupted at all.
Yeah, he was disillusioned, but he was, Lucas has specifically stated he was disillusioned with the Republic and with the Senate, not the Jedi. He just felt that he could do more good from a different position, but this wasn't the Jedi's problem. It was just the limitations that the Jedi, have for the work that they do, was something that he was choosing to let go of in order to do something else. There was no real problem or frustration with the Jedi themselves in his choosing to leave. He becomes corrupted sort of afterwards. But, so that's kind of the big theme. That's why we hit on the rigged election, right? Is that the Senate is the thing that is currently being corrupted and twisted, and the Jedi, I think I've said this elsewhere before, but the Jedi I kind of see as like a barometer for the galaxy's health, right? So like the more Jedi there are, the better it's doing. The fewer there are, the worse we get. So by the time you get to Revenge of the Sith and we have a fascist empire running things now, there's, effectively, 2 Jedi left if we forget about all the survivors that have popped up in other things. There's Yoda and there's Obi-Wan and like Luke and Leia, who are not official Jedi at this point. They're just Force-sensitive kids. But the Jedi have basically been exterminated and the world goes into darkness, and it only starts to get better when the Jedi start coming back, in Return of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Jedi's destruction is a consequence of the corruption around them, not the cause.
And more importantly, Palpatine playing people does make them victims. It does not make them stupid. Just because they trusted that the people in power who have always worked for them, that just because they trusted the system doesn't make them stupid. They were doing their jobs. It is not their fault that somebody manipulated them.
Nor is it their fault that the system that they are trying to continue to fix and work with is falling apart around them. It also doesn't mean, this is an argument I've seen too, it also doesn't mean that the system didn't work. Ever. Like, yes, the system is currently being corrupted, and we do see that, but it doesn't mean that there is, like, no point where the system worked, or that the system was inevitably going to fail. Depending on which canon you're looking at, the Republic as an organization worked for 1,000 years at minimum, and like 25,000 at a maximum, depending on your canon. That is a fucking long time. Especially given that a lot of the other, governments that we know about that have cropped up since then have lasted like a couple decades at best, before falling apart. So the system that the Jedi and the Republic have created was actually a good, workable system, like right up until the end. So I've seen the argument that like, the Jedi should have just left, or the Jedi should have just realized that this system didn't work. And like, it's just not true.
Well, in fairness, if the Jedi had left, that would have been better for the Jedi. But the purpose of the Jedi is to help the people of the galaxy. The Jedi would have been better off if they had gone off on their own and created their own little isolated temple and like chilled out over there. That is completely true. But the Jedi want to help people. So if that is their goal, they need to stay where they are and continue to try and help fix the system. If they just abandon it, then how are they any different from the Separatists who they're trying to fight?
Yeah, or, the Sith themselves. The Sith are trying to destroy it, but how does the Jedi leaving, not just constitute them abandoning the problem? Like, if they had, you can bet that the fans would have, condemned them for just abandoning everybody too. So,
right.
They're just not going to win this regardless, but, yeah, it doesn't help anybody but the Jedi, so it looks selfish if they leave. But, yeah, so, the system itself appears to have worked up until very recently, so it's not the Jedi's fault. It's not even necessarily the fault of the system itself that everything went bad. It was intentionally corrupted, which is obviously very important to recognize because it's the parallel to Anakin, who did not start out as an evil baby. He was not born cackling, and spitting lightning out of his hands. Like, he was a compassionate, sweet, kind child who does get corrupted later. Like, this was not an inevitability, and that's, like, a really important thing within the themes and messages of the trilogy, is that neither of these corruptions was inevitable. Both of them were good, both of them worked, right up until they didn't, and the Jedi's genocide is a consequence of these two, this one person and the organization of the Republic making the choice to be selfish and corrupt and greedy. Because it's convenient, or, because they let their fears control them and whatnot.
And then we move on to episode 2, where it's been a jump of 10 years. And I've seen some people talk about how, like, Palpatine did this so easily. It took Palpatine his entire life to corrupt the Senate. His entire life.
Palpatine was playing the long game.
The long game.
Really
it took him a really long time. He didn't just walk in there and, like, easily corrupt the whole thing. It took him a long time. It takes him, 12, 13 years to corrupt Anakin, constant, with really regular contact? Like, that's a long time. He put a lot of work into this. Whatever else I can say about the man, I do have to respect his work ethic, because he was putting in the hours.
Yeah, and I mean, like, we don't know exactly how far back it's gone. Like, I don't think we know exactly how long he's been a senator. I mean, people who are up on the lore of Palpatine might, but it's not specifically stated within the films exactly how long he's been in the Senate, but, like, we know from Padme that you do have to go to, like, Senate school, like politician school on Naboo, before you do that. And she was in Senate school at, like, 10 or 12, so this could be a very, very long process for Palpatine.
We know that he had a master when he was young. Well, he has one up until he kills him in Phantom Menace, but he had a master when he found him when he was about 20, I think, in his novelization. And so he spends the next, I forget how old he is in Phantom Menace, but 30, 40 years?
He's supposed to be in his 40s or 30. Yeah, it's like 40 or 50, probably. Given that that's about how old the actor is.
He grades so quickly. Anyways, about 30, 40, 50 years hanging out, just learning Sith stuff and corrupting the Senate and working his little worms into everything. Like, he put a long time in. He was an apprentice for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which, in fairness, probably was also working on a plan to get rid of Plagueis. But because I'm sure taking out a Sith Master is not an easy task either.
No, which is...
Oh, it's super easy. You just have to do it while they're in their sleep.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And I mean, Dooku spends...
You just have to be planning
decades.
it for a long time.
Like poor Padme,
Yeah.
who gets corrupted assassins sent after her.
Yeah.
Like, a lot. Like, a lot. That's, like, the whole second movie is Padme is being, like, trying to be assassinated. That's not how you would say that. People are trying to assassinate Padme. There we go.
Yeah, Palpatine was trying really, really, really hard to kill Padme until she fell in love with Anakin. He was like, oh, shit, actually, I can use you, so let's keep you alive for now.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good segue into our little mini game, because the question is, who's actually trying to kill Padme and why?
Nice.
Because it's not the obvious answer. It is said in the film, but Faye kind of just gave her answer, but I'm gonna let Nat answer this one real fast, since Nat is the casual fan and has seen it first, or more recently. So Nat, who do you think is actually trying to kill Padme throughout
Like,
the movie?
throughout the movie?
Yeah, like, who's the person behind it? Like, obviously you got Zem Wessel and Django as the actual assassins kind of doing the work, but who is the person behind it who actually wants Padme dead? And bonus points if you can tell me why.
Is it... Okay, because in the second film, Django is like, I was hired by... What's his name? It's not just the word tyrant, but it basically is.
It's Tyrannus.
Tyrannus, who's a Dooku.
He is.
But at that point, Dooku is, like, under Palpatine/Sidious's control. So I'm going to assume that it's Palpatine the whole time.
And it seems to be Faye's answer, too.
Yes. Because Padme is a very competent political person. And, like, a political threat to him. That's my guess.
And I think that's Faye's answer, too, just given what you were saying earlier, Faye.
Well, I know that technically it's not Palpatine who requests it in the movie.
What?
It's that freaky-ass Nemodian dude whose name I forget, although the actor's really hot. But he wouldn't be requesting it if it wasn't something Palpatine wanted him to do. Like,
it actually has nothing to do with Palpatine. So Newt Gunray is the Nemoidian.
that's his name. Thank you. I was going to say Nate, and that was incorrect.
It was incorrect. You were real close, though.
Are you talking about the Trade Federation evil twin people?
Yeah.
Yes. So
Okay.
it is specifically the Viceroy. You would have known him more as the Viceroy.
Yes.
So it kind of relates to that in the sense that he presumably, I think he gets like arrested or something by the end of The Phantom Menace, and has since like gotten out of jail. He's teamed up, and Dooku has intentionally sought out the Trade Federation because one of the things Dooku is doing within Attack of the Clones, and presumably has been doing beforehand, is trying to get the corporate alliance, which is the Trade Federation, the Banking Clan, and the Techno Union, to join his efforts to start the war. Basically, he wants them to kind of be backing the Separatists so that they can get the war started. And what we hear Newt Gunray say is that he isn't going to join Palpatine unless... he's not going to join Dooku. Very specifically, he's not going to join Dooku unless Dooku kills Padme. Because he's pissed off that Padme, when she was queen, defeated him on Naboo during the invasion 10 years ago. He feels like she humiliated him, she got him arrested, blah, 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 blah.
That's because she did.
So it really has absolutely nothing to do with Palpatine. Palpatine could not care less. Newt Gunray is being asked to do this thing, and he is saying, okay, I'll do what you want, but only if you do something for me in return.
I wouldn't say that Palpatine doesn't care. It's because they stopped trying to kill Padme after this movie. So Newt Gunray is obviously working with them anyways. So he has convinced him. So it's more that he was ambivalent about Padme's life, and he's like, yeah, sure, you can kill her if you want. It's fine. But then when she becomes useful to him because Padme is in love with Anakin and vice versa, then he stops him from killing her. Because Newt Gunray is still alive at the end of this movie. And he's working with the Separatists.
He is, but you could argue that, Dooku gets pretty close. It's hardly Dooku's fault that, Padme doesn't end up getting killed on Geonosis. He does put her up for an execution. And you can tell Newt Gunray is still really pissed off about this. When the Jedi start coming in, or no, it's before the Jedi come in. I think it's when they're fighting the monsters and they seem to be winning. Newt Gunray has that line, he's like, you promised me she'd be killed. And Dooku has to kind of placate him, being like, just wait. And then, of course, the Jedi come in, the clones come in, and things kind of go off the rails. But, it is definitely, regardless of whether Palpatine is allowing it in the moment, he's not the one asking for it. He's not actively seeking it, because it really does not matter to him within that moment whether Padme dies or doesn't. He doesn't care if she's arguing not to start the war, because he knows he can start it whenever. Regardless of what she chooses to do, he knows that as soon as he pulls out the droid army and tells Dooku to start things, he's got the Senate under his thumb, and the war is going to start. It does not matter what Padme does. Yes, it's arguable that he probably does have to, placate Newt Gunray later, or has to ask Dooku to do it, so that Padme stays alive, but also the war starts, which probably does distract Newt Gunray to some degree. I think also the implication that we're getting in the film is that he's, Newt's already there, he's already working with Dooku, because Dooku's made this promise. And Newt is basically just kind of pushing for this promise to be fulfilled. So yes, he's already working with Dooku. He's not, not committed. He's just, we have a deal, you're supposed to fulfill your end of it. So it is Newt Gunray asking for Padme to be killed. Palpatine is not the one asking for this. It's not him behind it. It is Newt Gunray.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, and so that, rolls into the idea that there's a lot of weird political complexities happening in this trilogy, and a lot of them go straight over people's heads. The whole thing with Newt Gunray never gets remembered. Everyone thinks it's Palpatine, because it seems like the obvious choice, right? That Palpatine is aiming for Padme to get killed because he thinks that her politics are going to be a problem. Because that seems like the obvious way to go. It's not, though. That's not actually what happens in the movie. And whether it makes sense or not is, debatable.
I mean, I think the argument can still be made that her politics are a problem for him, because he specifically sends her off to be hidden in the forest so she can't vote against his war, and he manipulates Jar Jar into voting for his war in her place. Mm-hmm. So her politics are a problem for him. They're just more of a nuisance that he's trying to deal with rather than an actual issue.
But he doesn't want her dead. I mean, he can send her off, and he's taking advantage of the fact that Newt Gunray wants her dead, but he's arguably more interested in getting her connected to Anakin than he is about eliminating her politics. I don't think her politics are ever really an obstacle for him. Because he knows that he can pull out the droid army and the clone army and manipulate the Senate no matter what Padme does or doesn't do.
Right. And I think that her being a problem for him is not, she's not enough of a problem for him to be I want this bitch dead. He has so many other tricks up his sleeve, and I think it's, makes it kind of more interesting, because it's very easy to look at the prequels and go, Palpatine is the villain and the only villain, but, what is actually happening is way more complex than that, and he is using other people, but he is also, he's taking this viceroy and being okay, yeah, I will work with you, and Dooku as my apprentice will work with you because we want to take advantage of you, and that means making negotiations yeah, we'll kill this person for you. I don't know, he is not necessarily directly involved with Dooku. I have no idea how much Dooku is doing just on his own without being instructed to do it.
I have to imagine he has to get Palpatine's go-ahead for a lot of things.
Right. Palpatine doesn't really seem like a chill boss. He does feel like a micromanager.
But I don't know that he's a micromanager so much as, big decisions do have to be run by him. It is still Palpatine's plan, and Dooku does have to always be doing Palpatine's plan, but I think, the day-to-day minutia and details are things that Dooku can kind of just manage on his own.
Yeah.
And in Clone Wars, we do see him managing things the separatist parliament or whatever, effectively by himself. That he's left to just do that, to just go to those meetings and kind of just keep manipulating the politicians by himself. So I do think that there's a certain amount that Dooku is doing effectively on his own. We can probably assume that hiring Jango was Dooku's choice.
Yeah.
And that, Palpatine arguably did not give a shit about who was the clone base, we don't even know if the clone army was technically Palpatine's choice or Dooku's. and I mean, Faye, I don't know if that's in the novelization, I assume not, but I don't think it's ever explicitly stated whose idea it was to make a clone army. But we know that Dooku specifically is the one sent to hire Jango, so you can kind of assume that Dooku at least made that choice. Yeah, I think big decisions are run by Palpatine, but Dooku is doing a lot of day-to-day kind of detail stuff by himself.
Yeah. Dooku does like all the personal HR crap, and Palpatine's like, wait, don't remember, you have to make sure the money that you're paying for is itemized on your bill. So that I have to pay for it.
Well, he just steps in to go like, you are getting out of your britches. You're getting too big for your britches. Mm-hmm. Please step it back.
And then we
also bring me the Death Star plans.
Yeah, the Death Star plans are very important because I need them to blow up people. And it's only going to take me 20 years to build one, and then like 5 years to build another one.
Yeah, like I have to I don't think Dooku ran the execution via monster by Palpatine. One must assume that Dooku probably is just kind of rolling with the punches here for that.
Yeah.
But that, like, he at this point probably is aware that Palpatine is probably not that fussed over Padme or Obi-Wan dying. But you'd think that, like, Palpatine probably is not super about Anakin dying. So he maybe does not want Anakin to be executed via monster.
Yeah.
Which is probably why he essentially allows the clone army to be picked up by the Jedi right at that point to start off the thing. Like, all of that going off right at that moment worked out very well for him.
Well, except that Palpatine wouldn't know that Anakin is on Geonosis, because Anakin is told explicitly not to go to Geonosis. He's on Tatooine at the moment. Nobody knows that Anakin and Padme are going to end up there, except for Anakin and Padme, because Padme does this on a whim. And so, the only way Palpatine would be aware that Anakin and Padme are there is if Dooku mentions it, like, off-screen before the actual execution happens, which might have happened, but it doesn't seem to have any bearing on whether the clone army is picked up or not, because at that point, all they know is that Obi-Wan is on Geonosis.
Yeah, it is interesting that Padme is the one who chooses to go for Obi-Wan, because yes, Obi-Wan is her friend, but also, like, she has responsibility to keep herself safe, and she is choosing to go after him anyways, and they aren't that close. Like, they haven't really spoken that much in the last 10 years. So it's a really interesting example
also, they don't
of
speak
Padme
that much in Phantom Menace either.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't really talk that much. And so it's a really interesting example of Padme being pretty reckless with her own self and her own life because she can't stand to see somebody that she has even a minor responsibility to die on her watch when she has a chance to do something about it.
Or even less than that, just someone that she has the ability to help, right? Like, it could have been anybody. Or, to be fair, it could be that she knows that Anakin cares, and so she's doing this kind of more for Anakin's sake than anyone else's. But I think it's more that, like, Padme is the kind of person who is like, that person needs help, I happen to be able to give it, so I'm gonna do it, like, regardless of the consequences.
Which is something that I think is actually one thing that her and Anakin are very similar in. Well, that gets twisted in Anakin a lot later, and he, like, no longer has that, but the desire to immediately jump in and be a little bit reckless and do something stupid that's going to, like, help, and even though it might cost them their life, is something that they both share, even though people don't recognize that a lot in Padme, because I feel like she gets portrayed as, like, very cool-headed a lot of the time. But she's quite reckless.
Which is really funny because this film actually explicitly states the opposite during that scene where they're both heading off to do the refugee thing, to go to Naboo, and Obi-Wan's like, oh, I hope he doesn't do anything reckless, and Captain Typho's like, I'm more worried about her. Yeah,
like, she's explicitly quite a reckless person, and it's so wild that she gets portrayed as very cool-headed in so much fandom, because she's not. She is not the reasonable one. She's just as reckless as Anakin is.
She's just as reckless, and I think, you could argue that she is, in some ways, just as selfish and greedy in her attachment as Anakin is. Like, she doesn't let it turn her to murder, but I think that she is, her attachment to Anakin has just as much selfishness in it. In terms of why she's going for him, that she's doing it because she's getting something out of it, rather than because she genuinely cares about Anakin as he is. Like, I think both of them see each other as these idealized, rosy versions of each other, and not the reality, which is why she's so taken aback, right? And is why she sits there and pretends that he's not saying things that he is saying.
Which is also why I think the choice to take her coming to Mustafar with the knife was a mistake, because having that be like the ultimate end, like her being willing and matching his energy and being willing to descend into murder for the good of the galaxy, whatever their twisted versions of that is, would have been a really interesting parallel for them. And instead having her be like the weepy mother, well, also works. It's not as good for her character itself.
Nat, I don't know if you're familiar with what Faye is talking about. Do you want to have a little more context for that?
So sorry.
It sounds like a deleted scene or maybe a change. I'm so sorry, friends. I do think we have a lot to talk about. We might have to do a whole episode on Anidala later.
That's fine.
And we might have to move on.
Okay.
That's fair.
I'm going to be the harsh host here.
That's fair. This might be an easy segue into episode 3 then, because we're starting to throw ourselves there, and talk about Padme, in the relationship. But yeah, so we've got, basically episode 3 as the conclusion, obviously, to the corruption that we've been seeing over the last 2 episodes, both of the Republic and of Anakin. We see the Jedi attempting, one last big rush to try and save the Republic, and failing. Not because of, any wrongdoing or weakness on their part, but just because, they were betrayed by someone they trusted.
I also will say that the Jedi are not stupid. Specifically, like, in the very beginning, they trust Palpatine, but, like, throughout the entirety of the 3rd movie, they are constantly like, we don't trust Palpatine, something is wrong.
I'll also point out that we know that they are questioning politicians in general, that this is something that the Jedi all do, because, you've got Obi-Wan specifically telling Anakin not to trust Padme because she's a politician, and this doesn't mean that he thinks Padme's a bad person at all, but just that, politicians have agendas. Mm-hmm. That's just what being a politician means, that they have an agenda, and you cannot trust that their agenda is the same as yours. You have to keep that in mind, and the Jedi all keep that in mind, and they would have that in mind for Palpatine, too. And, you got, Nat, you pointed out in your notes that, you've got Mace specifically pushing against Palpatine, trying to get them to be soldiers, right? That he's like, we're keepers of the peace, we're not soldiers, so they're already kind of frustrated with what Palpatine is doing, within Attack of the Clones, too. They don't know him very well in Phantom Menace, because he's just the Naboo senator at the time. He's not a chancellor, so he wouldn't have had as much interaction with them. But you can tell by Attack of the Clones they're not super fond.
Yeah.
And then by Revenge of the Sith, after 3 years of war and everything, obviously, that does get expanded upon in Clone Wars, they're like, oh yeah, no, this guy is corrupt as fuck and has to be taken out. And I think that's something that also gets misunderstood sometimes with Revenge of the Sith. I've seen a lot of people saying that, they go after Palpatine specifically because Anakin tells them he's a Sith, and that is explicitly untrue. They are working on upsetting Palpatine just because he's a corrupt politician. They are willing to go arrest him for being a corrupt politician.
Yeah, him telling him that he's a Sith hastens their thing, so they go to do it immediately, and it means that they bring more masters with them. They were originally planning on, I believe it just being Mace and a couple of people, but instead he brings all the top duelists to go arrest a Sith Lord. They don't realize that the Sith Lord is, the Sith Lord, I think. They don't know the extent of his powers, because they're all caught very off guard by the fact that he can spin through the air. But, whatever.
He does a lot of spins in that fight.
He does. It's probably one of the sillier fights in the prequels, is that one, because obviously Ian McDiarmid can only do so much. But I think, actually, that, all 4 of the characters who are going to arrest Palpatine seem to be there. They're already heading there to arrest him. And so arguably they are more prepared just because Anakin tells them he's a Sith. So they're like, okay, probably he is going to fight us on this one, rather than assuming that he's just this kind of dainty little old man politician who happens to be hopped up on power, power trip. But, they're already on their way to arrest Palpatine when Anakin comes in and says, by the way, that guy you're going to go arrest, he's a Sith. I think at this point they are assuming he's the Sith Master, because there obviously can only be 2, and I think they're aware that Dooku is probably the apprentice, because like, Dooku came in later and Maul was around before. I think that there is this assumption, I think, that the person they're going after is the Master, especially given Dooku's comments to Obi-Wan in Attack of the Clones that, like, the Sith Lord is controlling the Senate.
I was going to say, also there's the fact that he told them that he was the apprentice.
That's right, yeah. He kind of says, like, the Master is in the Senate and is controlling things in the Senate. So by the time that Anakin comes in and says, oh, Palpatine is the Sith Lord that we've been looking for, they know it's the Master. But, yes, they seem to be caught off guard by just how powerful Palpatine is. Which, to be fair, like, you can critique that fight a lot, you know, in terms of, like, how quickly the Jedi are taken out.
They go out like chumps. It's so sad.
They go out like chumps. It's really
Mace.
bad. Except for Mace, because they just
Mace has a long fight all on his own.
He does, and, like, obviously this is done to just simplify the fight and to really, like, set up very quickly how powerful and scary Palpatine is, but it just comes off a little ridiculous, and, like, the Jedi don't come off very well. And I think, like, you know, like, a better choreographer, which, no shade to the choreographer who did work on the prequels, who is, like, a legendary choreographer and obviously created all the other really good fights, but whatever happened in this fight didn't get done as well as it could have. Like, I understand what they were going for, but it does kind of hit a little off, especially given that these characters have been expanded upon later to be, as Faye mentioned, some of the top duelists in the Order.
My boy Kit Fisto deserved to go out better.
Oh my God.
I love him so much.
My boy Agent Kolar also did. Agent Kolar is definitely, like, I think in the comics and stuff that he's been in, has been said to be, like, one of the best, if not the best duelist in the Order. Like, up there with Anakin and Obi-Wan and all that, like, kind of stuff. It's, you know, it doesn't make any sense, obviously, that they get killed so quickly, but, you know, the fight is what it is. But yeah, that's one of those things that I think gets radically misunderstood by a lot of people, is this idea that, like, they only turn on Palpatine because Anakin tells them he's a Sith, when, like, no. Like, they're already on it. You know, Anakin is the one who's only just turned against Palpatine because he's a Sith, you know. But yeah, so there is, like, some, we can kind of discuss, like, the interesting interesting in that it's not necessarily executed as well as it could have been, that Anakin is still being shown as a good person at the beginning of this movie, that he's got, like, fun banter with Padme and Obi-Wan. You know, there's some nicer moments that he's got with some of the characters, but he kills Dooku in cold blood, and you know, that you can tell that he's frustrated with the council still, which, you know, you can tell what they're doing again here, but this doesn't work as nicely with the Tusken Massacre from the last film.
Yeah.
It is really interesting when, in both Attack of the Clones and in Revenge of the Sith, there are scenes with Anakin and Palpatine where it's just them. There's only like one or two, but there's scenes with Anakin and Palpatine where it's just them. And in the scenes, Palpatine is saying everything that Anakin is saying, just in, like, vaguer tones. And it's really, really interesting to watch Palpatine say these things, and then Anakin parrot them back later on in the movie to other people with a lot more feeling and rage, like he has internalized them. And it's just a fascinating watch of, like, how he, like, slowly becomes corrupted with these ideas, where he's constantly fighting, like, do I internalize what Palpatine is saying, or do I internalize what the Jedi are saying? And he always chooses wrong. Even though I love him dearly, he always chooses wrong.
Palpatine is very good at, like, the leading, not questions, but just, like, let me plant this idea in you. It sounds like what you're feeling is this, and Anakin's like, oh, that is what I'm feeling. Fuck.
Anakin's so bad at self-reflection. He never knows what he's actually feeling because he just believes what Palpatine tells him.
Yeah. And the Jedi are, like, don't have the context of what he is dealing with. And so they're not in a position to help him. When Anakin goes to Yoda and is like, I'm having these nightmares about someone close to me dying, Yoda gives him advice that's, like, not helpful, because Yoda doesn't understand that Anakin has made a commitment to something that's not the Jedi. Like, which he is not supposed to do as a Jedi.
I mean, I'm going to push back that, like, the Jedi can help Anakin, and they are doing everything they possibly can. The problem
They're
is that
doing
Anakin,
their best, they're up against a lot with Palpatine.
Well, they're up against Anakin keeping secrets in that scene in particular. Like, a
That
lot of
too.
people have pointed out that, like, Yoda is literally having to finish Anakin's sentences for him in that scene because Anakin is holding back so much.
Yeah.
And it's not even just that they don't understand that Anakin's made a commitment to Padme, but that Anakin is not saying, I've had a vision of Padme dying in childbirth, you know? Like,
Yeah.
so all he's saying is someone close to me might be dying, and the context they have is that Obi-Wan has just been sent off to go fight Grievous.
And
And
they're
so
in the middle of a
lot
war
of people have pointed out,
with his pub.
and that they're just
Yeah.
in the middle of a war in general, and so they're like, well, he's probably worried about Obi-Wan dying, you know, on this mission maybe. A lot of people around him, a lot of the other Jedi have died, and so he just goes like, people die, there's not a lot we can do about that, and the best you can do is remember them kindly. But if Anakin had been much more specific about his dreams, which you could argue is something that he does in the last film as well, with his dreams about Shmi and his conversation with Obi-Wan about it, you know, that he's going to get more specific help.
Yeah.
You know, like, had he gone to Yoda and said, so, I might have knocked someone up, and I've got visions of that person dying in childbirth, what are my options? That Yoda might have come up with some more specific advice, you know?
Yeah.
But, like, if all he's being given is vague problems, all he can give back is vague solutions. You know, like, there's only so much he can do when Anakin is refusing to, you know, own up to things. And the same is true with Obi-Wan. Like, a lot of people critique Obi-Wan's dreams pass in time advice, but, like, you know, as best as he can tell, like, Anakin is having regular basic dreams about missing Shmi, you know, that are upsetting him, but he has no context for what's actually happening in the dreams.
I mean, that's what we are assuming, because we don't actually know. Like, there is no, like, hey, this is what you're actually dreaming about. He knows he's dreaming about his mom, but we don't know if Anakin has told him or not. We're assuming not because it doesn't tell him anything else, but that is an assumption we are having to make, because they're not very explicit.
They're not super explicit, but just if we're going off of what we hear happen in the films, Anakin doesn't say anything, and he intentionally switches the conversation so that he doesn't have to. Like, Obi-Wan is pushing for more information, and Anakin intentionally shuts the conversation down because he doesn't want to talk about it. And we can probably assume that this is something he's been doing in any other conversation they've had about it.
There's a weird theme with Anakin where he seems to be very ashamed of his feelings, both in the very beginning in The Phantom Menace when he refuses to admit that he's afraid, and then continuing on into the rest of the films. And it seems like it's something that Palpatine both encourages and... he encourages him to feel all of his feelings, but he also encourages him to keep them a secret. Like, there's the scene where he's like, oh, you remember what you told me about what happened to your mother and the Tuscans? And, like, there's an implication there that you only told me this because you would have gotten in trouble if you told anybody else. And, like, this is, like, our secret that I have it over you. And it's, like, this weird theme where, like, it seems like Anakin both doesn't know what he's feeling a lot of the time because he's bad at self-reflection. And when he does know, he refuses to admit it because he doesn't want to have anybody know that he is feeling things. And it's such, like, an interesting thing for him to have, especially as a Jedi, where most other Jedi seem very comfortable with their feelings. That it's such a cool flaw, and I want it to be explored more. But instead, the Clone Wars is just like, Anakin doesn't even have feelings. What do you mean?
Well, he has feelings. It's just that his feelings are all anger and violence. But
those are not feelings. Those are things that happen because of feelings that he was already having.
That's fair, but those are the emotions that they are focusing on in Clone
That is
Wars.
what they show him. Like,
and we can have an entire episode about the changes that the Clone Wars made.
And we're going to.
Yeah, we'll have an entire
will.
episode about the Clone Wars and the impact that it had on the prequels and the changes they made. So we don't have to get into that here because that is an entire episode in and of itself. But just to finish off episode 3, we do see Anakin refusing to make different choices, even when told by other people that he is supposed to trust that he still can. Like, even after he's committed a genocide, he still could, make different choices, and he's just refusing to.
Yeah, he's at the sunk cost fallacy, right? He has decided that he has dug his hole so deep that he cannot get himself out again. So he's continuing to dig the hole even deeper. He's so smart.
Mm-hmm.
There is some of
So
that,
smart.
and there is, I think, also supposed to be that he's in it now, and some of it is feeling good, right? Like, the power, the dark side is kind of, he's let it in, it's starting to feel a little bit good, and he wants more, you know, and that's kind of like what the dark side does, right? You're never satisfied. And, you know, this is where you get the things about, like, it's his new empire, right? Like, he wants that empire. He wants to kill Palpatine and take it, and it's not really about saving Padme anymore towards the end. Obviously, he chokes her and tries to kill her by the end, but, like, it kind of... I mean, it never really is about Padme. It is about Anakin not wanting to live without her, but... so he's not doing it for her, but like by the end it kind of shifts away from even that much. It's not even about not wanting to live without her, and it starts to become about, I want the power. And that's the same thing that happens to Dooku, right? That Dooku might have been noble in some of his reasons for leaving and his disillusionment with the Republic, but that by the time we get to the Phantom Menace, it's not really about saving the Republic or the people anymore. He's literally starting a galactic civil war. You know, and, you know, you continue to see that through Clone Wars as well, but that it is now just about power and wanting power, and you see that happen with Anakin too, that he has kind of succumbed to greed and selfishness more than anything else, and the compassion that might have once led him in previous years is just gone. It's just not there anymore. It's no longer leading him. What little is left is being crushed.
There is a really interesting juxtaposition in Revenge of the Sith where immediately after Anakin kills the Separatist leaders, while crying, by the way, there's like a scene of him like looking out over the river and like looking extremely upset, like looking like he is just as upset as he was in the temple when he decided to go after Palpatine and like stop him from dying. And then it's immediately followed by the scene where he is looking like high on power with Obi-Wan and Padme, like when she comes in and he just looks so excited to see her, and then like he just immediately goes on to this like long rant about like how the power he has now and how great everything is. And it's such an interesting scene. I think in the novelization they go into it a little bit where they talk about how their interpretation is that he has spent the time in between those scenes basically sinking deeper into the darkness, so he doesn't have to feel what he's feeling. He doesn't have to feel the devastation of what he has wrought. And it's such a fun little juxtaposition, and I want to pick Lucas's brain about it.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of stuff about Revenge of the Sith that got like a little bit changed, and, you know, things that got cut and didn't make it in because like it would have been a 5-hour movie if everything.
It was a long movie.
It's a long movie as it is, and there's still so much that got cut from it. So, you know, it's like Anakin is, even at this point where, you know, he's in this in-between kind of limbo where he's already committed a lot of acts, but he still seems to regret it, is still making the choice to just sink further into it rather than make any different choices. Padme shows up, Obi-Wan shows up, they give him chance after chance after chance to change his mind, and he just refuses it every time. And I think, you know, that's why choice to me is such, like, a really important theme and message within not just this trilogy, but obviously the entire 6-film arc, is that it's always about choice. You know, Anakin is not being like possessed by the dark side and forced to do this. You know, Palpatine is not making choices for him. It's not the Jedi fucking him up so much that he can't make another choice. It's not inevitable. Anyway, yeah, just that like it's always Anakin's choice. He is making choices the whole time. And I think that's really important to remember, and that a lot of like Anakin fans, not Faye, but like the weird ones.
I am a perfectly normal Anakin. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, you are not what people would normally call a Stanikin. You are one of the regular Anakin fans who likes him and recognizes that, like, he is, you know, making a lot of terrible choices.
He does make bad choices.
He makes really bad choices.
Yeah, that he made bad choices. They are his choice.
My sad little trash can son who gets stuffed into a trash can for the rest of his life.
Yeah. But, like, a lot of the Stanikins, you know, will, like, refuse to give Anakin any agency and recognize that he's the one making the awful choices
which is just less fun as a character.
It's less fun, it's less interesting, it's less complex, and it doesn't really fit into the themes of choice.
When we're talking about choice, what's interesting too is like in the scene with Padme and Obi-Wan, they also have choices here. Padme and Obi-Wan could both choose to go with Anakin and to fall into this place of darkness. Padme has done it before. She has allowed Anakin to get away with murder before and follow the dark side before, and she has accepted it. So she could make that choice again. And in this scene, she chooses not to. She chooses to reject the darkness and continue towards the light. And that is what allows the twins to be born and ultimately take down the Emperor. And Obi-Wan, by making the choice to not go with Anakin, even though he could, even though he loves Anakin so much, he chooses to reject the dark yet again, and which also allows him to teach Luke the bare minimum and keep Luke alive for the next 20 years so that him and Leia can take down the Emperor. Like, it's such a fun...
And more specifically, that Obi-Wan has to choose to let Anakin go, so much so that he can kill Anakin, or at least that he maims Anakin, mostly, but that he can leave Anakin behind to die. And, like, that's the very specific choice he's making, right, is to let go of his memory of what Anakin has been, and to sort of accept what Anakin is now, enough that he can do what must be done.
I would argue that he doesn't let him go, because if he truly let him go, he would have mercy killed him on the side of the river. He can't kill him at that point. He can't let him go fully. I don't think he lets him go until the Kenobi series. That is the point where he fully lets go of who Anakin used to be to him. But at the end of Revenge of the Sith, he is still holding on to that. He is choosing to go with the light, but he is still holding on to who Anakin used to be, and that's why he can't kill him completely. He leaves him to die, but he leaves the choice up to the fates.
He does. I'm kind of trying to view the movie without the context of the Kenobi show, because obviously it would have been made without the context of the Kenobi show. So it has to work without it. And so I think within the context of the movie, as it would have needed to be written for the fans, for the viewers, like, I think you are supposed to understand that this is the moment where he's choosing to let go by walking away, that yes, he's not going to mercy kill Anakin, but that, you know, Anakin is clearly dead anyway. And I mean, he couldn't have seen Palpatine coming. Palpatine is supposed to be getting killed by Yoda at this point. So, like, yes, he can't make the last blow, but also Anakin is dying anyway. And I think it's just this moment of, like, walking away, right? That, like, you know, narratively, Obi-Wan cannot make the mercy kill. It's just, he can't. You know, Darth Vader just has to survive. And so they had to kind of come up with a way for Obi-Wan to win and escape while still, you know, allowing Anakin to survive. And so it does leave us with this kind of odd little moment where he does not mercy kill Anakin. People have argued that, like, would it be a mercy kill, though, if Anakin isn't asking for it? You know, that Anakin is yelling, "I hate you." He doesn't seem to want to die in the moment, and so would it actually be a mercy kill, or would it be an execution?
Yeah, and that's fair.
Would Obi-Wan...
Interesting.
And would Obi-Wan killing him in that moment be more akin to Anakin killing Dooku earlier? You know, where Anakin cannot fight back anymore, you know? Like, he is effectively completely unable to defend himself now, and so Obi-Wan making that last blow would make him more of an executioner. And so he makes the opposite choice.
In the Dooku scene, the choice is, do I take this person in to be prosecuted for their crimes, or do I execute them as the person who is in charge of the Republic is telling me to? And so, like, yes, the correct choice, as Anakin immediately identifies afterwards, would have been to take Dooku in to execute for his crimes. But in the situation with Anakin, there's 3 choices here. He could kill him, he could leave him to die, or he could take him with him. And he chooses to leave him there. There isn't, like, an actual clear correct choice in the situation. Like, the kind thing to do would have been to kill him, because he is clearly suffering and is going to die in a lot of pain the way that he is. And possibly the correct thing to do would have been to take him with him to get him treated and answer for his crimes in some shape or form. Because as far as Obi-Wan knows, Yoda has defeated Palpatine. Like, that is the plan, right? So
It's arguably the plan, yeah.
He is leaving him to die as the choice that is the one that he can bear to do. He can't bear to bring him back and be responsible for him anymore. He can't bear to kill him, so he leaves him.
I think what has ended up interesting about this scene, I don't know if it was intentional or not, is that, kind of like we're finding in our discussion here, is that you might be able to view it a number of different ways. You know, you could see it as Obi-Wan kind of almost letting the darkness take him for a second and intentionally leaving Anakin to burn and suffer because he's angry and upset. You could see it as Obi-Wan choosing to let go by just sort of walking away and choosing not to take responsibility at all, refusing to be an executioner, but also refusing to do anything else, that he just lets go of Anakin's hold on his life and leaves him. And you could kind of view it as somewhere in between, right? That Obi-Wan just can't bear to make that last move. He can't bear to be responsible, so he just sort of sits in this limbo. But it is left ambiguous enough that I think you can interpret it a couple of different ways and have it remain relatively in character. I think the one that allows his narrative to kind of be the most satisfying is that he's letting go, because, without the context of the Kenobi show, which wouldn't have existed at the time, or, it needs to work without any extra context.
Yeah, but there's 20 years between this movie and the next one, so you can easily be like, okay, so in the time in between, he has let this go and, separated this out into his mind, as people figured out in fan fiction.
Yes, but I think in terms of actual good writing, there's a reason he kills Padme in this and doesn't just say, oh, well, obviously she died somewhere in between in order to make Leia's comment still make sense. He recognized that Padme needs to die so that her arc can come to an end, and it doesn't just sort of peter off into the in-between realm, between the two films. And so I think, in order for this to be considered a relatively good written, satisfying ending for Obi-Wan, we have to assume that, he is chosen to let go of Anakin by the end of the fight, and that walking away is him letting go. Obviously, if you take it with the context of the Kenobi show now, you can view it differently, because he gets that conclusion later. But I think if we pretend that doesn't exist and just look at the film as it would have been written to exist at the time on its own, it's not as satisfying if he's in limbo and you're just oh yeah, the conclusion to his arc happens off screen. It's not the most satisfying way to end his arc if you never get to see it.
No, that's fair. We do have to wrap this up.
Okay, are you ready? I'm taking over.
Okay.
Sugar.
Yeah.
With the prequels, what, with absolutely no context, you cannot go into detail. I trust you.
I wouldn't, but okay.
2 or 3 things that worked for you, what do you think they could have improved on?
Well, I think Obi-Wan worked.
Okay.
We said last time that Obi-Wan was my favorite character. I do think Obi-Wan is probably arguably the best character in the prequels, one of the ones that worked the best, and probably is one of the most fun to watch. As a kid, I think the costumes probably got me into it more than anything else.
The costumes are so excellent.
The costumes are excellent in this movie, and they really kind of, feel very fantastical and adds to the sort of science fantasy feel of this series. And I'm just going to say that the Jedi themselves, I think, were an incredible choice in the way that they are portrayed. Obviously, this was a controversial choice because a lot of people understood the Jedi to be different, that they were supposed to be knights instead of Buddhist warrior monks. But I'm going to say fuck everyone who thinks it was a bad choice. Jedi are great. I think this is the best choice that could have been made for them. They are wonderful. I do think that there is a lot of sexism and racism throughout this entire series that does cause it to be very uncomfortable and frustrating sometimes. And I think that there's a lot of extraneous things happening in the prequels. I think he bit off a little more than he could chew. With, like you were mentioning before, how complex and how stuffed these films are with plot and details that don't quite get enough time to get explained in a way that always makes sense. And so things feel kind of choppy and underexplored throughout the series. And you have to do a little bit of extra homework to kind of pick up on some of the things that happen and connect them together.
Yeah.
And I'm going to leave it there.
Excellent. I love that.
Thank you.
Angela.
Yes.
Things that you liked, things that maybe could use some more work. I know that you both have spent a lot of time talking about how you could fix the prequels. And unfortunately, we don't have time to get into that today.
Do not. Things that I liked. I liked the Star Wars. I liked the lightsabers. And I liked the Jedi. I didn't like the racism.
Okay, great. This is a good opinion that you have.
I love that first one. I like the Star Wars.
I like the Star
like
Wars.
the
There
Star
were
Wars.
Star Wars, and they were in the stars, and they were great. Oh, actually, really quick,
were
this is the best thing in the entire trilogy. You ready? The best thing in the entire trilogy is the sound effect from Jango Fett's bombs that he goes boom. That sound effect should have won an Emmy and an Oscar and a Tony all by themselves.
just
the sound effect all by itself. Whoever made that sound effect deserves to have like beautiful chocolate on their shelf forever because they were so smart. That's such a beautiful sound effect. That's my conclusion.
I love that. I cannot wait to go find that sound effect. So that I know what the fuck you're talking about.
It's a fantastic sound effect. You'll love it. Maybe I'll play it in this track so everybody can remember what this gorgeous sound effect sounds like.
I love that for us.
Editor Angela here. I have found and am adding in this sound effect. Warning for your ears.
Shout out to what appears to be Ben Burt as the sound designer, film director, editor, screenwriter, blah, 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 blah.
Ben Burt, if you're out there, please know that you have my undying affection. Whatever you need, I'll be there.
Gosh, sugar.
Wow, it says he is notable for popularizing the Wilhelm scream in-joke. So
good for you, buddy.
I looked into that a lot.
The voice of R2-D2, the lightsaber hum, the heavy breathing sound of Darth Vader, creating the Ewok language.
Oh my god!
He has given you a lot.
Wow.
And
to close us out, would you guys like my favorite goat fact today?
Yes, please.
Are you ready? Goats have very sensitive lips.
That makes sense to me.
They use it to mouth things in search of clean and tasty food.
Oh, good for them.
Good for goats.
Excellent ending.
Beautiful.
Goodbye,
You did so well.
We did so great.
Our intro and outro music is Mos Eisley Cantina by Speedkicks. Angela and I edit, our artwork is by me, and Sugar is our writer and researcher. You can find us on Instagram and Tumblr at Unleash the Goats. Thanks for listening.